Chapter 5. Data Collection Techniques. This chapter will deal with 3 frequently used data collection techniques: the questionnaire, the interview, and observation. The questionnaire. Questionnaire planning. The planning that should precede the design of a questionnaire is not that different from the planning that should go into the early development of a research study. Reviewing the major steps and of emphasizing decisions that should be made before the data collection instrument is selected or designed. Advantages of the questionnaire. The questionnaire, which the American Heritage Dictionary of the English language defines as a form containing a set of questions, especially one addressed to a statistically significant number of subjects as a way of gathering information from a survey. Advantages of the questionnaire including the following. 1. The questionnaire, especially the mail, email, and web-based questionnaire, tends to encourage frank answers. 2. The characteristics of the questionnaire that help to produce frank answers also eliminate interviewer bias. 3. Another way of stating the second advantage is that the fixed format of the questionnaire tends to eliminate variation in the questioning process. 4. The manner in which a mail questionnaire is distributed and responded to also allows it to be completed within limits at the leisure of the participants. 5. Questionnaires can be constructed so that quantitative data are relatively easy to collect and analyze. 6. Questionnaires can facilitate the collection of large amounts of data in a relatively short period of time. 7. Last but not least, questionnaires are usually relatively inexpensive to administer. If there is advantages, there are also disadvantages of the questionnaire. While the advantages of the questionnaire seem to outweigh the disadvantages, there are several of the latter that should be noted. 1. Use of the mail questionnaire eliminates personal contact between their searcher and the respondent. 2. The mail questionnaire does not permit the respondent to qualify answers to ambiguous questions, or at least makes it more difficult. 3. Studies have shown that persons who are highly opinionated regarding the subject of a questionnaire are more likely than others to be motivated enough. 4. Questionnaires may be more difficult for uneducated participants to complete, again possibly resulting in a biased return. 5. In general, there simply seems to be a resistance to mail questionnaires. 6. Non-response rates are relatively high for mail, email, and web-based questionnaires, although web-based surveys often first use another survey method to recruit participants. 7. If the questionnaire is distributed electronically, it will reach only those who have access to and are comfortable using email and web technology. Those are the advantages and disadvantages of the questionnaires. Constructing the questionnaire. Proper construction of the questionnaire is essential to its success. In general, the researcher must consider his or her information needs and the characteristics of the participants. Under constructing the questionnaire, there are type of question according to information needed. There are 7 types of question according to information needed. 1. Factual questions. Questions used to ascertain such things as their respondent's age, gender, and so on. 2. Opinion and attitude questions. Questions intended to determine a person's ideas, inclinations, prejudices, convictions, and so on. 3. Information questions. Questions designed to measure the respondent's knowledge about some topic. They typically require the greatest response time. 4. Self-perception questions. Questions quite similar to attitude questions, but restricted to one's opinions about himself or herself. 5. Standards of action questions. Questions used to determine how respondents would act in certain circumstances. 6. Questions about actual past or present behavior. Questions that potentially fall within some of the categories of questions already identified, but tend to be narrower in that they focus on behavior. 7. Projective questions. Questions that allow respondents to answer questions indirectly by imposing their personal beliefs, attitudes, and so on onto others. All or most of the items in a questionnaire may be focused on one specific topic and, in aggregate, considered to constitute a scale for the topic of interest. Type of question according to form. In selecting or designing questionnaire items, the researcher must consider the question format that will best obtain the information desired. The form of the question in turn determines the method. There are two basic types of questions: open-ended questions and fixed addressement questions. Open-ended, or unstructured questions, as the name indicates, are designed to permit free responses from participants rather than ones limited to specific alternatives. On the other hand, fixed response or structured questions, also known as closed questions, limit responses of the participant to stated alternatives. The possible response may range from a simple yes or no. Examples of open-ended questions are: what do you think about the library? Which library services do you value the most? I typically use the library in order to. Structured questions come in a variety of specific formats, including the following. 1. A checklist, each item of which requires a response. An example is provided for this and each of the other types of structured questions. To follow. Second is 2. A checklist of items, one or more of which represents the best answer. Which of the following types of library services do you use at least 5 times a year? Circle all numbers that apply. 3. A checklist of items with subdivisions or categories. What is the highest grade of school you have completed? Circle 1 a number. 4. A checklist of bracketed or grouped responses. How many times did you use a public library during the past 12 months? Circle 1 number. And lastly, 5. Fill in the blank. The reference desk is on the floor of the library. And those are the 5 examples of structured questionnaire. Scaled responses. A variety of questions utilize scales of one type or another in order to obtain responses. One kind of scale is the rating scale. Specific rating scales with examples include the following. 1. An itemized rating or specific category scale. 2. A graphic rating scale. This too is a scale designed to collect ordinal-level data, but unlike the specific category scale, the graphic scale allows the respondent to check. 3. A rank order or comparative rating scale. Ranking-type questions are not always recommended and should be used carefully. Multiple item scales can be categorized as differential, summated, and cumulative. Differential scale, it is often referred to as a Thurston type scale, utilizes a series of statements or items with equidistances between them. Second is summated scale, also consists of series of statements or items, but no effort is made to distribute them evenly along a continuum. And lastly, cumulative scale. It consists of a series of statements with which the respondent indicates agreement or disagreement. However, the items are related to each other, so one should respond to subsequent items. Next to be discussed is question content and selection. Having decided on the types of questions to be employed in terms of the information needed and the form of response desired, the researcher must next decide what specific questions to ask. One technique that can help the researcher avoid unnecessary and redundant questions while asking those that are necessary is to construct a variable question matrix. Next is question wording. In 1940, the 2 forms of this attitude question were asked in a split ballot experiment using 2 comparable national samples. In most cases, questionnaire items should be impersonal, but whether they hold request information directly or indirectly depends on the type of information needed. In constructing questionnaire items, one should be careful that the wording used in certain questions does not bias responses to later questions. Sequencing of questionnaire items. Even the sequencing of questions can influence how they are answered. Changes in question order can produce context errors, resulting in substantial differences in responses to the same question. Due to the effects of context, it is important to maintain the same order of questions if a survey is being repeated in order to investigate trends. Within a single study, the researcher should consider whether a question is likely to be influenced by the context of the preceding questions. Sources of error. Before continuing with the outline of the procedures for developing a questionnaire, it may be worthwhile to consider some of the types of questionnaire error not already discussed. Some of the more common types of error or bias, not all of which are limited to questionnaires, are the following: 1. Researcher bias. 2. Sponsorship bias. 3. Imperfections of design. 4. Respondent interpretations. 5. Time lapse. 6. Circumstances. 7. Response bias. And lastly, 8. Reactive insight. Those are the 8 common errors or biases. Next is preparing the first draft. Questions within these sections could then be ordered from the most general to the most particular. On the other hand, the researcher may wish to achieve the optimal psychological sequence, which may not be the same as the most logical arrangement. In preparing the first draft of the questionnaire, the researcher may decide that some questions are of such a nature that respondents are unlikely to answer them accurately or honestly. Evaluating the questionnaire. Once the first draft of the questionnaire has been completed, and before it is actually pretested, it is a good idea to get one or more experts' opinion of the questionnaire. A person who is expert in research methodology can help to catch methodological weaknesses in the instrument, such as faulty scales, inadequate demonstration, and so on. The pretest. This pretest is sometimes referred to as a pilot study, although pilot study is actually more synonymous with exploratory study. A pretest gives the researcher an opportunity to identify questionnaire items that tend to be misunderstood by the participants, do not obtain the information that is needed, and so on. Final editing. Having been pretested, the questionnaire is ready for final editing before distribution. It is recommended that the title of the study or survey be placed at the top of the questionnaire. The general rule is that the questionnaire should be as short as possible in order to encourage complete responses. Cover letter. The basic purpose of the cover letter is to explain briefly the purpose of the study and to stress the importance of each person's responding. Another useful technique for increasing the response rate, as well as helping tonsure frank answers, is to guarantee confidentiality and/or anonymity for all respondents. Next topic, also covered in Chapter 5, is distribution of the questionnaire. There are 3 main methods of administering the survey questionnaire. The self-administered questionnaire can be mailed or electronically transmitted via email or the web. Mail questionnaire. Unless the questionnaire is designed as a self-mailer, or is to be faxed or mailed back to the researcher, it should be accompanied by a self-addressed, stamped, return envelope. Most researchers utilizing a mail or email or web-based questionnaire should expect to have to conduct 1 or more follow-up mailings in order to reach an adequate response rate. Electronic questionnaire. They were basically paper questionnaires delivered electronically, or as Pickard states, they are basically paper-based questionnaires that utilize a different distribution mechanism. Email and web-based surveys can be designed to automate skip patterns and automatically validate answers. Next is the interview. Developing the interview. The basic steps in developing a standardized or structured interview are not that different from those for developing most other kinds of survey studies. One of the first steps must be development of the list of questions to be asked, or the interview schedule. An additional step in the development of the interview involves the training of interviewers. Next is conducting the personal interview. In conducting an interview, the interviewer should attempt to create a friendly, non-threatening atmosphere. The interviewer should answer all legitimate questions about the nature of the study and produce appropriate credentials upon request. He or she should be prepared to respond to such questions as, "How did you happen to pick me? Who gave you my name? Why don't you go next door?" In addition, when asking the questions, the interviewer should avoid rephrasing questions for the interviewee. In obtaining or encouraging responses, the interviewer may find it necessary to repeat certain questions. This should not present a problem so long as the interviewer does not significantly change. In order to obtain an adequate response from the interviewee, it may on occasion be necessary for the interviewer to ask the respondent to elaborate on his or her reply. Disadvantages of the interview. As with other research methods and techniques, bias presents a real threat to the validity of interviews. As was indicated earlier, some interviewer bias can be avoided by ensuring that the interviewer does not overreact to responses of the interviewee. The Internet interview utilizes computer-mediated communication (CMC), which allows humans to interact directly with each other in synchronous or real-time using monitors, text, and keyboards. One of the main biases of Internet interviewing is the unrepresentatives of the sample, since not everyone has access to or uses the Internet. Rapport and interpersonal relationships are more difficult to develop in an online interview than in person. It is difficult to authenticate the responses in an Internet interview, which necessitates taking steps to ensure that the appropriate person is participating in the interview. Those are the disadvantages, and let's move on to advantages of the interview. In contrast to the mail or electronic questionnaire, the interview does have certain important advantages. Perhaps most important, it almost always produces a better response rate. Consequently, it is also possible to employ interview schedules of greater length than comparable questionnaires without jeopardizing a satisfactory rate. It is generally believed that the interview is better at revealing information that is complex or emotionally laden. The use of visual aids can sometimes facilitate present and recording. Focus group interviews. The focus group is a group interview designed to explore in depth the feelings and beliefs people hold and to learn how these feelings shape overt behavior. They are called focus groups because the discussions start out broadly and gradually narrow down to the focus of the research. Focus group interviews can be utilized in library and information science research to answer research questions concerned with evaluation of library resources and services, including online analysis and reporting of the focus group data, ethnographic summary and content analysis. The content analysis approach produces numerical descriptions of the data. Content analysis is the tallying of mentions of very specific factors. Ethnography involves establishing rapport, selecting research participants, transcribing observations and conversations, and keeping diaries. Alta Gertz believes that none of these techniques. The validity of the analysis of the data collected during the focus group interviews is another concern. Other advantages and disadvantages of the focus group interview. The main advantage of focus group interviews is the opportunity to observe a large amount of interactions on a topic in a limited period of time. The methodology can also be used with hard-to-reach groups, such as library non-users, minorities, and children. Focus groups should be followed up with statistically sound quantitative research. They should not be used as the sole basis for making policy decisions. Telephone interviews. Another important type of interview is the telephone interview. Because more and more interviews are being conducted over the telephone, this technique deserves special attention. When the respondent answers the telephone, the interviewer begins asking the questions and inputs the respondent's answers into the computer. In order to summarize some of the advantages and disadvantages of the mail survey, telephone survey, in-person survey, and electronic survey, a chart comparing the three techniques on major criteria. Observation and usability testing. Observe means to watch attentively in a scientific or systematic manner. In an observational study, the current status of a phenomenon is determined not by asking but by observing. Observation is sometimes treated as a research method, sometimes as a data collection technique to be utilized with the research method. As a data collection technique, it is used in both In basic research, it is used with both experimental and survey research designs. Observational methods are central to much qualitative research. Advantages of observational research. As a data collection technique, observation has several important advantages, including the following. 1. The use of observation makes it possible to record behavior as it occurs. 2. Observation allows one to compare what people actually did with what they said they did. 3. Observational techniques can identify behavior, actions, and so on that people may not think to report because they seem unimportant or irrelevant. Limitations of observational research. Observational techniques do suffer from a few limitations. Some of the more important ones are as follows. 1. It is not always possible to anticipate a spontaneous event and thus be prepared to observe it. Some of the most critical activity at the Library-Sonlin catalog. 2. The duration of an event affects the feasibility of observing it. The activities at an online catalog are generally short enough to be easily observed. 3. Some types of behavior are obviously too private or personal in nature to be observed. 4. It is generally somewhat more difficult to quantify observational data than other kinds. Unstructured observation. There are essentially two basic types of observation: structured and unstructured. The latter will be considered first. Unstructured observation is sometimes equated with participant observation, but its most important characteristic reflects the fact that the researcher does not have predetermined sets. In recording unstructured observation, it is best if records are made on thespit and during the event in order to maximize their accuracy. Structured observation. Structured observation is a more formal technique, often used in quantitative studies in order to provide systematic description or to test causal hypotheses. The most basic step involves developing the observational categories to be employed. These are set up in advance, but may be adjusted later if necessary. Specific techniques used for recording structured observations include the use of rating scales, with which characteristics or behaviors are rated according to the degree to which they are present. Usability testing. Usability testing is a form of human ethnographic observation combined with ergonomics and cognitive psychology and became popular for interface design in the 1980s with the growth of Access. It was catalyst for human-computer interface (HCI) usability studies. The user is involved from the initial design phase through system upgrades. Usability testing is being used in libraries for the development and evaluation of online catalogs and websites. Some suitable, basic library-related questions for the methodology include: what is the best layout for a web page? How can reading from the screen interface be optimized? Which online fonts are the best? What makes a site difficult to use? Usability testing also can accommodate more structured, detailed questions, such as: can individual personality or cognitive skills predict internet use behavior? Can library collection holdings and library data be represented geographically? Can users easily customize and manage discipline-specific content available in an open-source library portal? Can users quickly and easily find serials, that is, newspapers, journals, magazines? Summary. In conducting survey research, the researcher has several data collection techniques at his or her disposal. This chapter has emphasized three of the most commonly used techniques: the questionnaire. Questionnaires and interviews are frequently used for obtaining information about a person's perceptions, beliefs, attitudes, and so on. Those are the topics tackled in Chapter 5, Data Collection Techniques. I hope this video helps you more understand the basic research methods for librarian.